When I first arrived in Florence, I thought I was dreaming. The air was warm and full of sound, the sky was bright, and everything around me looked like a painting. I came with my cousin Charlotte, who was my chaperone, because young women were not supposed to travel alone. We were staying in a small hotel filled with visitors from England. Charlotte had chosen it carefully because it was respectable, but the room they gave us did not have a view. It looked out onto a dark wall. I remember standing by the window, disappointed. I had imagined seeing the River Arno or the hills of Florence. I wanted to open the window and feel the Italian light. Instead, I saw only gray bricks and heard people talking in the rooms nearby. When we went down to dinner that evening, I tried not to show my feelings, but another guest at the table noticed. He was an older man with kind eyes, and beside him sat a quiet young man. The old man said to us in a friendly way that he and his son had rooms with a view and would gladly change with us. Charlotte was shocked. She said that a lady could not accept such an offer from strangers. I felt embarrassed and thankful at the same time. That was my first meeting with Mr. Emerson and his son George. Charlotte whispered that they were not our kind of people. She said the father spoke too directly and that he must be careful of what he said in public. But I did not think he was rude. I thought he was honest. His eyes were bright and curious, as if he could see more of the world than others. George, on the other hand, said nothing. He looked serious, almost sad, but his silence made me want to know more about him. The next morning, I went to visit a church with a group from the hotel. It was full of light and color, and I felt something strong inside me, like excitement and peace together. When I came out, I walked a little further on my own. I remember turning into a square full of people and sounds. I heard music, then a man shouted, and I saw a small fight. It happened so fast that I could hardly understand. One man pushed another, there was a knife, and suddenly someone fell to the ground. I froze in fear. I had never seen death before. Then I felt someone beside me. It was George Emerson. He put his arm around me and led me away from the crowd. I could not speak. My hands were cold, and I started to shake. George found a place to sit and brought me some water. He did not say many words, but he stayed close until I felt calm again. When I finally looked up, I saw the same sadness in his eyes, but also something else, something gentle. I did not know what to think. I had been told that young women should not be alone with men, that everything must be proper. But I did not care at that moment. I only felt safe and grateful. When Charlotte found me later, she was upset that I had been separated from the group. She thanked George coldly, as if he had done something wrong, and hurried me away. I felt torn between her strictness and my own feelings of warmth toward him. That night I could not sleep. I kept seeing the image of the man who had fallen and the way George had looked at me. There was no fear in his face, only understanding. I tried to pray, but my thoughts wandered. I began to think that perhaps life was not only about rules and manners. Perhaps it was also about what we feel when no one is watching. A few days later, we went for a drive in the hills outside Florence. The day was golden, and the countryside looked like a dream. We stopped at a small field full of violets. The smell was sweet and soft, and I walked a little away from the others. I wanted to be alone, and to breathe the beauty around me. Then, without a sound, George appeared. He looked at me quietly, and I saw that same expression I had noticed before, full of feeling and pain. Before I could speak, he came closer and kissed me. It was a gentle kiss, but it shook my heart. I stepped back, and for a moment we just stood there. Then Charlotte's voice called from behind the trees, and everything changed. She had seen us. She rushed forward, took my hand, and told me we must leave immediately. I could not say a word. My face was hot, my heart was beating fast, and I felt a strange mix of shame and happiness. On the way back to the hotel, Charlotte said we must never speak of what happened. She told me George had acted without respect, and that no gentleman would do such a thing. I tried to agree, but deep down I did not feel angry. I felt alive. I could not stop thinking about that moment in the field, about the light, the air, and the sudden feeling that I was part of something real. When we left Florence soon after, I did not say goodbye to George. He was standing near the hotel entrance when our carriage drove away. I looked out of the window and saw him watching the road, his face unreadable. For a second, our eyes met. I wanted to wave, but I did not. I turned away and told myself to forget. Back in England, everything looked smaller and quieter. The green fields, the polite conversations, the same daily walks. It was all as before. My mother was pleased to have me home, and soon everyone expected me to think about marriage. I tried to be calm, to return to my old life, but sometimes when I looked out of the window of my room, I remembered Florence and that bright Italian view. I often asked myself if it was wrong to feel so much. Charlotte said that emotions like that lead to trouble, that young women must be careful. But I felt that care could also be a kind of prison. I began to understand that what happened in Florence had changed me in ways I could not yet name. Before we continue, I would love to know where you are listening from. Which country, which city? Share it in the comments. And if you are enjoying this retelling of A Room with a View, please subscribe for more stories every week. One afternoon, my mother invited a family friend to tea. His name was Cecil Vyse. He was polite, well-educated, and admired by everyone for his good manners. He read poetry, spoke quietly, and never said anything wrong. At first, I thought he was the kind of man I should marry. He seemed safe, the opposite of George Emerson. When he looked at me, I felt that he saw a polite young woman, not a person full of questions and dreams. Cecil began to visit often. He talked about art and society, and my mother liked him very much. I tried to listen, to be what everyone expected. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes. I thought it was the right thing to do. Everyone around me said I was lucky. But the night after our engagement, I looked out of my window again, and the view seemed empty. I remembered the Italian hills, the smell of violets, and George's eyes. I told myself that those memories were foolish, that I must grow up and forget. Yet something in me refused to let go. It was like a small flame that would not die. I did not know then that Florence, George, and that one forbidden kiss would soon come back into my life in a way I could never have imagined. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe share and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now let's continue. When I became engaged to Cecil Vyse, everyone around me seemed happy. My mother said I was fortunate to have found such a clever man. My brother Freddie said Cecil was serious but kind. Even Charlotte wrote to congratulate me and reminded me that a good marriage was every woman's duty. I tried to believe them. I told myself that love was not wild or confusing. It was calm, reasonable, and full of respect. Cecil gave me books and spoke about art and society. He said we were made for each other. I smiled and agreed, even when my heart felt quiet and cold. Our home in Surrey was peaceful, and life returned to its usual rhythm. But something inside me had changed. I often found myself thinking of Florence. It came back to me in flashes, the sound of the river, the smell of the violets, and the strange light that had made everything feel alive. When I remembered George Emerson, I told myself it was only a passing thought. He belonged to another place and another time. Still, his face came into my mind when I least expected it. Cecil liked to control everything. He did not mean to be unkind, but he treated life like a play where he was the main actor. He often corrected my words or explained my opinions as if they needed improvement. When I looked out from my window, the garden seemed beautiful but small. I thought about the wide hills of Italy and how free I had felt there. One evening, Cecil said he had found new tenants for the house down the lane. It had been empty for months, and my mother was happy to hear it would be filled again. Cecil smiled as he told us who they were. A father and son, he said. Strange but intelligent people, I hear. Their name is Emerson. The sound of that name made my heart stop for a moment. I tried to hide my surprise, but my voice trembled slightly when I asked where they came from. From London, I believe, Cecil said. They seemed odd but harmless. I met the son once, a quiet man, not much of a talker. I said nothing more. Inside, I felt both fear and excitement. I did not know if I was ready to face the past I had been trying to forget. When the Emersons arrived, I saw them from my window. Mr. Emerson greeted everyone with warmth as he had in Florence. George was taller now, and there was something strong and calm about him. He did not look up at my house, but I felt as if he knew I was watching. My heart began to beat faster. That night I could not sleep. I lay awake and thought about how strange life was, how it brings people back together when you least expect it. In the days that followed, we met by chance. At first, I tried to act distant, but it was difficult. George was quiet, but his eyes said things that words could not. Once we met near the church after Sunday service. He looked at me for a long moment and then said softly that he was glad to see me happy. I wanted to answer, but no sound came. My heart was full of confusion. Cecil noticed my silence after that day. He thought I was tired, perhaps from reading too much or walking too far. He did not see that my thoughts were far away. He planned our life carefully, our wedding, our home, our guests. He spoke about the future as if it was a map he had drawn himself, but every time he said we, I felt as if something was missing. One afternoon, Cecil organized a picnic for a few friends. It was a warm summer day and the sky was pale blue. We drove out to a field near the woods, not far from the Emersons' cottage. I remember feeling restless as we arrived. Everyone laughed and talked, but I stayed quiet. The air smelled of grass and sun. When I looked up from where I was sitting, I saw George walking nearby. He had come with his father. Cecil, thinking it amusing, said it would be polite to invite them to join us. I did not look at George directly. I could feel his presence, and it frightened me. When the group began to wander, I walked toward a small grove of trees. The air there was cool and still. I thought I was alone until I heard footsteps behind me. George stood there. I wanted to leave, but I could not move. For a long moment, we said nothing. Then he spoke in a low, steady voice. He said that he had tried to forget me, but could not. He said he had gone on with his life, yet every view, every sound reminded him of Florence. I told him to stop. I said I was engaged. I said it was wrong to speak that way. But even as I spoke, my voice shook. He looked at me with quiet sadness and said that I was lying to myself. He said that I was meant to be free, not trapped by other people's expectations. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, but tears filled my eyes instead. Then, before I could turn away, he came closer and kissed me again. It was the same feeling as before, wild, sudden, and full of life. I pulled back and ran, breathless and confused. My heart was racing. I felt both shame and joy. When I returned to the group, Cecil was talking cheerfully. He noticed my face and asked if I felt unwell. I said it was the sun. That evening, I tried to write in my diary, but could not find the right words. I wanted to tell myself that nothing had happened, but it had. The truth was alive inside me, no matter how much I tried to hide it. Days passed, but I could not escape my thoughts. I began to see Cecil more clearly. His careful words, his cleverness, his plans, they no longer impressed me. I realized he did not love me as I was. He loved an idea of me, a quiet, perfect woman who would fit into his world. I started to notice how he corrected me, how he laughed at my brother's jokes, as if they were childish, how he looked down on people like the Emersons. One evening, when he was reading poetry aloud, I found myself staring at him and thinking of George's simple words and open face. George did not hide behind books or manners. He looked at the world as it was. I understood now that Cecil saw everything through glass, as if afraid to touch life directly. The next day, I walked alone to the woods. The wind was soft, and the trees made a sound like the sea. I sat on a fallen trunk and thought about what I truly wanted. I realized that all my choices had been made to please others. I had never asked myself what made me happy. I remembered Florence, the light, and that first moment when I saw the world from a window with a view. When I returned home, I knew what I had to do. That evening, Cecil was waiting for me in the garden. The air was cool, and the sun was setting behind the trees. I told him quietly that I could not marry him. For a moment, he looked shocked. Then he smiled politely, as if I had made a small mistake. He asked if I was confused or tired, but I said no. I said I had been blind, and now I could see. Cecil stood silent. He said he wished me well, then walked away slowly. I watched him go and felt both sorrow and relief. My heart was heavy, but my spirit felt light for the first time in months. I went to my room and opened the window. The air came in fresh and free. I thought of George again and wondered if he knew how much he had changed me. For the first time, I was not afraid of what people would say. I was afraid only of living a life that was not mine. After I broke my engagement with Cecil, the house felt strangely quiet. My mother did not understand why I had done it. She said that many women would be happy to marry a man like him. I told her that he was kind but not the right man for me. She sighed and said I was foolish, that I had allowed my imagination to control my life. I did not argue. I was tired of explaining feelings that words could not describe. For several days I stayed in my room and avoided visitors. I thought about what I had done and what might come next. I had broken all the rules that had been taught to me. I had refused a safe and respectable life. Yet when I looked out of my window, the world looked brighter. The fields, the garden, the sky, they all seemed more alive than before. I felt afraid but also free. Charlotte came to visit soon after. She said that everyone was talking about me and that people thought I had lost my mind. She spoke with her usual serious voice, reminding me that a young woman must think of her reputation. But her words no longer had the same power over me. I listened politely, but in my heart, I felt calm. I was no longer the girl who followed every rule. I was beginning to see my own life clearly, as if through a window that had finally been opened. A few days later, Freddie came to me. He was cheerful as always and did not care much about gossip. He told me he had met George Emerson again and that they had played tennis together. When I heard his name, Mahamud Mawayne, my heart jumped. Freddie said that George had asked about me, but had not said much else. Then Freddie smiled and said that George was the best man he had ever met. That night I could not sleep. I thought about George and the way he had looked at me in the field, so full of truth and courage. I wanted to see him again, but I was afraid. What if he had stopped caring? What if my silence had hurt him? I told myself that I must forget him, that I had already made enough trouble, but the thought of never seeing him again filled me with sadness. The next morning, I decided to go for a walk. The air was cool and the sun soft. I went down the road past the fields until I reached the small churchyard near the woods. There's Hut. To my surprise, I saw Mr. Emerson. He was sitting on a bench, looking at the trees. When he saw me, he smiled kindly and said I looked tired but peaceful. He asked if I was happy. I told him that happiness was a strange word, that I was not sure what it meant anymore. He nodded and said that happiness is not something we plan for. It is something that happens when we stop pretending. He told me that George had been hurt when I left Florence, but that he still believed in me. He said his son did not care about what people thought, only about what was true. His words were simple, yet they felt like light coming through the clouds. I did not answer at first, but inside I felt something wake up. When I returned home, I knew I could no longer hide from my feelings. I told my mother that I wanted to go away for a few days, to visit a friend by the sea. She agreed, thinking the change would do me good. But my real plan was different. I wanted to go back to Florence. I wanted to see the city that had first opened my heart and perhaps to see George again. The journey was long, and as the train moved through the hills, I watched the colors of Italy appear again, the gold, the green, and the deep blue of the sky. When I arrived, I felt as if I had come home. The streets were full of life, the air was warm, and the sound of bells echoed across the city. I went back to the same hotel where Charlotte and I had stayed before. The woman at the desk gave me a room. This time, it had a view. I stood by the window and looked out over the River Arno. The water shone in the sunlight, and the hills in the distance looked soft and blue. I thought about how much I had changed since my first visit. I was no longer afraid of my own feelings. I wanted to live honestly, not politely. That evening, I went for a walk through the narrow streets. I passed the square where the fight had happened, the place where George had once saved me. I felt both sadness and gratitude. When I returned to the hotel, I heard footsteps in the corridor. I turned and saw George. He looked surprised to see me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said softly, "I thought you had gone forever." I told him I had come back to find peace. He said, "You have come to find the truth." I felt tears in my eyes. I wanted to speak, but the words did not come. He walked closer and said, "You were brave to end what was false, but do not stop there. Be brave enough to begin what is true." Something inside me broke open then, not with pain, but with understanding. I told him that I had tried to forget, but could not. I told him that I had been afraid of what people would say. He smiled gently and said that love does not ask permission. We sat by the window as the sun went down. The city below us turned golden, and the river caught the light like glass. I felt calm for the first time in a long while. I realized that the view I had always wanted was not only a picture from a window, but a way of seeing the world with honesty, courage, and love. I thought about the path that had brought me there, the mistakes, the fear, the silence, they had all led me to this moment. I was not the same girl who had come to Florence with Charlotte. I was a woman who had learned to listen to her heart. Later, as night fell, George said quietly that life is never easy for those who tell the truth. But he said it was the only life worth living. I took his hand and looked out at the city lights. The bells began to ring in the distance. I felt that everything around us was alive. The sound of the streets, the soft air, the warm glow. From the windows, in that moment, I understood what a room with a view truly meant. It was not only a room with a beautiful sight, but a life lived with open eyes and an open heart. It was about seeing beyond the walls of fear and custom. It was about love that was honest, not perfect. When I finally went to bed, I felt peaceful. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds outside the window. The sun came through the curtains, and the light touched the floor like gold. I stood there for a long time, looking at the world that had once frightened me. Now it felt like home. I knew that whatever happened, I had chosen rightly. I had chosen life and love and truth. I had chosen a view that would never fade. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.